But right now, via Skype, we want to welcome back to the show Leah Hirschfeld, and she is from the research department of CARD. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Sure, I'll give a quick update on who I am. Thank you guys so much, by the way, for having me. I love being on your segment. It's always a joy.
We love having you.
Thanks. I'm Leah. I'm part of our R&D team at CARD. I'm a research coordinator. So basically, I get to ask a bunch of cool questions, try to convince parents and kiddos to participate in our research, and then hopefully draw some cool conclusions that will help both our kids and our parents and the families we serve, and at a larger kind of add to the autism field as well.
Okay.
So it's a pretty neat opportunity.
We're always thrilled to have you here. And today on the show, she's going to be talking about a very specific research study, which is going to, I'm sure, get a lot of traction in the news. And it's people are going to have emotional reactions to this. And I just want to make sure that everybody knows that when we talk about research here, it's really important to us and to everybody here to not feel like a finger is ever being pointed at a person. Both of us really hate it when it feels like they're saying, see, this is your fault that your child has autism, as if there is a fault or there's anybody to pin blame on. That is not ever the intent here. And so we want to make sure that people understand that this is a pretty preliminary study and that nobody is trying to point fingers on anybody. I know it feels that way sometimes. Right? Okay, so having said that, Leah, you probably have other disclaimers you want to give about what you're about to talk about.
I do, and I love that introduction as well. And part of the cool thing about this segment, I think, is that we get to take really neat research and hopefully bring it out to light and let people know about it, but also really dig deep and kind of say, hey, this is really cool research, but research has its limits. And just because it was in this cool journal or by this well-known university doesn't mean that there aren't limits. It just means that, it's very cool. So on that note, now that we've built up all of this suspense over this article, the article I wanted to talk about came out last month. It's by a group at Duke University, and they were looking at THC and cannabis in father's sperm. And there's a lot of cool things about this. First being that it's neat to see research on fathers. We don't see it very often. And also it's neat to see some research being done on cannabis. As states are legalizing it more, as it becomes more widely accepted and used, it's great to see research on it because there's a lot we don't know, and there's a lot that we assume to know. So it's nice to see both cannabis research and research on fathers. There's a lot about mothers out there, but it's cool to see kind of sperm because we're not conceiving on our own over here. So, so what they did was these researchers looked at both adult men and then also rats. And rats might sound weird, but it's pretty typical when you see preliminary research that we are doing work on rats or mice. They're small, they're easy to use, and we can kind of check out what's going on before you jump into human sample sizes. So what the researchers did was they looked at adult males, and they just first looked at sperm from adult males who had used cannabis and then individuals who hadn't. And so what they looked at specifically, and I have to look at my notes on this one, they were looking at a protein called Discs Large Associated Protein 2, or DLGAP2. And this protein they were specifically looking at because it has been associated before with ASD and other neurological disorders. In part, they think because it does play a role in synapses and neuron organization and signaling in the brain. So what that means is they do believe that this protein is helping in the brain when neurons are firing and trying to talk to each other. This protein plays a role. So the researchers looked at adult males' sperm and who had used cannabis and who hadn't to see if there was a difference in this protein. And there was. And they did find pretty significant differences in the sperm of individuals who had used cannabis versus who hadn't. And so that kind of got the wheels turning, and they looked at the rat sample next. And so with the rat sample, they looked at THC rats, and what they did was they exposed them orally. So the rats took some THC pill, and then they looked at controls. And what they found again was that they saw the differences again in the sperm of the rats who'd been exposed to cannabis product versus the rats who hadn't. And then, and this is kind of where it gets very interesting, is the next part they looked at the offspring of the rats. So the offspring of the rats, they looked to see if, again, that on that protein, that DLGAP2 protein, if that had been affected. And this is where the results get really interesting because it's not super clear. The results seem to indicate that there were some differences, but they weren't statistically significant, which means statistically significant is just the term that researchers usually use when we're trying to make sure that what the results we're showing are important and matter. And it's interesting, actually, you usually see a publishing bias, so usually you cannot get papers published that have results that aren't statistically significant. It's a lot harder. And some of these results were, but a lot of them also weren't. And the authors make a note about a few of their, and this is again where we come into talking about how research is really cool and how you might see the title of an article and kind of get stressed about it. But when you start to dig deeper, there's a lot more going on as well. But so on 2 points, the researchers themselves note that the results might not have been statistically significant because their numbers are really small. And we've talked about that before on the show, where if the numbers aren't big enough, the sample size isn't large enough, the statistically significant value might not be there. And so for this, they only had 6 rats exposed to the THC, and they had 8 controls. So we're still talking pretty small numbers, especially for a rat study. And then on top of that, and this is, again, we don't know that much about autism still, right? We think that this protein has some effect here, but we're not 100% positive. And the authors also mention that even though the results weren't statistically significant, because of the role that this protein plays, even minor changes might affect it drastically. It also might not. It might really need to take a major change in this protein to change it into something like a neurological disorder. It also might not. We just don't know right now. Right? So there's a lot that we don't know. There's a lot going on. Really cool article. It's great to see things working with, articles working on fathers, working with cannabis, because there's a lot we don't know there. But still taking a critical eye and looking and seeing, okay, how many participants are in this, even if it's rats? How, is it actually the offspring of the humans they were looking at or the offsprings of the rats that they ended up looking at? And also, how much of this do we actually know? So very preliminary, very cool study, and hopefully there's going to be a lot more done here to kind of address this and keep looking at it. There's a lot in this paper that was really exciting and really cool to keep looking at, and there's still a lot that we don't know about it.
Okay.
So
I have questions.
Yeah.
The first thing I always like to do is sort of repeat back, translated to see if I have it.
Right.
So basically, they looked at they had men that had cannabis and THC, and some who hadn't, and they saw that when somebody is exposed to cannabis, that this protein is less in their sperm. Correct?
It's not necessarily less, but this is not. I'll also say I'm not a biologist. I don't know much about proteins. It's not that it's less, but that it was
Different.
Demyelinated or something.
Okay. So it is
yeah.
different. It is different in the sperm if they've been exposed to cannabis and whatever. And then they went and looked at this in mice, saw that was the same. So then they looked at the rat children. But out of the 6 rats that they had on cannabis, how many of them had children that were markedly different? Do we know?
Actually, that's not reported.
Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah, that wasn't
Okay.
in there. I'll check it, but from what my notes, I don't have it.
And then
So we don't know whether there was less of an incidence of autism or more of an incident.
And obviously, with rats, it's not autism; it's autism-like behaviors.
Autism-like behaviors.
Yeah.
Right.
So we know that it was not. What their phrase was, it was not statistically significant, although there
Right.
was something.
Right.
And they don't know because of the sample size. They don't know if they'd had more of them, if it would have been statistically significant. Are we in the
Right.
neighborhood?
Yeah, you guys are pretty
Okay.
spot on. And I'll go into it a little bit more. So you guys are totally right. They don't know. They didn't report, these offsprings had more autistic looking behaviors, which honestly, you guys might know more about that than I do. Even I don't know much about the mice and the rats world. What they did notice and what they did look for was how much that protein differences were in the offspring, and they didn't see it in the same way that they thought they would. They saw it with the neurons.
Got it.
But
Okay.
what they saw with the neurons was not statistically significant.
But they didn't tell us how many of the rat offspring had this difference.
Right.
Okay. So here are my other questions. Do we know the amount of cannabis in either the human trial or in the rat trial? Was it like, you know how a lot of times they will do the trial and they will feed them 7 pounds of something, which is more than any person would normally consume. So do we have any idea, was it a ridiculous amount of cannabis that they were giving people, or was it something within the norm?
So for the rats, it was in the norm. I can pull up the exact number, but in the rats, it was supposed to be equivalent to a human user who daily did cannabis.
I see. Okay.
I'm not so sure about the human adult males though.
Okay. Well, they're not going to give them something
Right.
that would, be so harmful,
Right, right.
because do no harm, right? Okay. Well, it's all very interesting.
Yeah.
And again, we want to say preliminary.
And what's the next step? Will they continue with a study of this type? And
Yeah. So I think they're still going to continue working on it. I think they're going to be looking at more rats and more males. And I'm hoping, I don't know if they're going to do it specifically, but I don't know if you even can, but I'm hoping that we can kind of move that into adult males and looking at their offspring as well, but that gets all sorts of more complicated. So hopefully they'll be, again, very preliminary, but hopefully they'll be expanding this to a larger section of the rats. And I'm also hoping there's other ways you can do THC. So the paper said that they specifically gave them oral, but they can do it to mimic more how you might inhale it. So I'm hoping that they also do potentially different forms of exposure to the THC to see if that also has some effect.
okay.
Very, very
Right. Yeah,
interesting.
very
So
interesting.
something that I'm sure there will be a lot more studies about to see, what we come
Yeah.
up with. Leah,
Well,
you're
thank you, Leah.
amazing, and you always fill our minds with things to talk about. This
Thank
now
you guys so much for having me on. It's
this
always
now
a
becomes
pleasure.
dinner conversation,
Right.
right? New study, did you see? Okay, well, we're thrilled, and please give our love to everybody on the research end of things.
Of course. Thank you guys so much for having us on.
Thank you, Leah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, thanks for watching Autism Live. To subscribe, click here. And if you'd like to check out some more of our videos, click here.